Welcome back. Today we are jumping right into a super fast-paced explainer on one of the fiercest, most fascinating figures in 18th century India. We're talking about Tipu Sultan, famously known as the Tiger of Mysore. This guy was a massive roadblock to British colonial expansion. His life? It's just an absolute whirlwind of military genius, hardcore modernization, and ultimate defiance. We want to cover his complete history in just about 3 minutes, so let's hit it. Okay, let's dive right into this. His legendary philosophy was actually pretty simple. It is better to live one day as a tiger than 1,000 years as a sheep. And you know, he wasn't just a ruler sitting comfortably on a throne. He was a frontline warrior who fundamentally refused to bow down to the British East India Company. That intense, uncompromising defiance, that's the thread that absolutely defined his entire life and reign.
And that fierce defiance was forged really early on. Born in 1751, Tipu got a highly elite education. He mastered multiple languages, mathematics, and military science straight from French officers. By the time he was a teenager in 1767, he was already out there commanding troops in battle right alongside his father, Hyder Ali. So when his dad died in 1782 during the Second Anglo-Mysore War, a totally battle-hardened 31-year-old Tipu stepped up and took the throne.
But get this, even before he was officially the Sultan, he was already making history. Take the year 1780, for instance. This was the Battle of Palilur. During this massive conflict, Tipu commanded forces that handed the British East India Company one of the absolute worst defeats they had ever suffered in India up to that point. He proved, almost instantly, that he was a complete tactical nightmare for them.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why he was such a persistent threat. He didn't just fight hard, he innovated. While older, traditional military rockets were kind of fragile and had a super short range, Tipu pioneered the use of iron-cased military rockets. These things had a significantly longer range and just caused absolute chaos for the British troops. They were actually so effective that they directly inspired the famous Congreve rockets the British would go on to develop and use in their own later wars.
But you know, he wasn't just a battlefield commander. The guy was a seriously ambitious state builder. As a ruler and a reformer, he completely overhauled the economy. We're talking a brand new coinage system, a new calendar, and vastly improved revenue collection to basically cut out corruption. He heavily promoted agriculture, trade, and state-owned manufacturing. In fact, he laid the very foundation for the world-famous Mysore silk industry that is still thriving today.
Tipu also had a pretty remarkable global vision. He realized the massive existential threat the British posed, so he actively sought out international alliances. He exchanged ambassadors and letters with major global powers. We're talking France, the Ottoman Empire, and Afghanistan. It was a concerted, strategic effort to build this massive anti-British coalition.
Now, what's really interesting about this part of his history is the complex debate surrounding his religious policies. Looking at the historical sources, it's a very layered picture. On one hand, there are clear accounts of harsh, wartime actions in certain regions under his command. But then, on the other hand, Hindus held really important, high-ranking administrative positions in his government, and he actively donated to and supported Hindu temples right alongside Islamic institutions. Modern historians emphasize that these actions were deeply tied to the really complicated political and military survival of his kingdom, rather than just boiling down to a simple binary of tolerance versus intolerance.
Ultimately, though, this fierce independence and utter refusal to yield led to a really dramatic climax. After years of just relentless warfare spanning 4 separate Anglo-Mysore wars, the British-led forces finally cornered him. On the 4th of May, 1799, they laid a massive and final siege to his capital city, Srirangapatna.
And true to that quote we talked about at the very beginning of this explainer, Tipu Sultan simply refused to back down. When the city walls were finally breached, he chose to fight right alongside his men on the battlefield rather than surrender his kingdom to the British. He was killed in the fierce defense of his capital, and his death marked a massive, permanent turning point that essentially accelerated British colonial expansion across the rest of the Indian subcontinent.
So the crucial point is, how exactly do we remember him today? As a fierce warrior, a brilliant military innovator, or a visionary economic reformer? His life was incredibly complex, but honestly, there's just no denying his enduring status as a powerful symbol of resistance and patriotism in South Asian history. Take a second to reflect on his multi-layered legacy, and let me know down in the comments what you think his greatest impact really was. Thanks for joining me for this quick explainer.